So the title Life Without Attitude suggests lots of different things depending how your mind works. And there's become a common usage of the word attitude to mean too much attitude, bad attitude, too much tude. So we'll have to define our terms, what we mean by attitude for the purposes of this discourse. I was going to say discussion, but it's not, it's a discourse. No discussing. I don't want to see anybody discussing anything. So life without attitude, maybe that, hearing that, it's appealing to some people, the idea of life without attitude, without taking a stance, without having a certain position. So let me start with the main point. If the idea of life without attitude of any kind is an appealing thought, don't get too interested in it because it's not possible. So for our purposes, what do we mean by attitude? We do mean stance, taking a position, a tendency toward. And why do we have attitude toward anything? Why do we have any attitude toward anything that we have? A person, a situation, life itself, God, Republicans versus Democrats, organic food. Why do we have any attitude that takes shape in us, that arises in us? Because you have a personality. And not only do you have a personality, but if it exists, it has a personality. A table has a personality. A plate of lasagna has a personality. A field of grass has a personality. One field of grass is not the same as another field of grass. Even if they're cut identical, even if the surrounding area is identical, made to be identical, two fields, two different nuance of personality. Can't be exactly the same. That's partly because no two things are exactly the same, but it's also mostly because everything that exists, not everything that's alive in the sense of its ordinary meaning, alive, but everything that exists has a personality. The galaxy we're in has a personality. There's tons of other galaxies. They have different personalities. So if you have a personality, you have an attitude. It comes with personalities themselves. It means you tend in a particular direction. You are interpreting even if you're seeing directly. If you have a mind, an attitude is going to be formed. So the combination of being an entity with a personality, and also you have a thinking mind, because remember, everything has a personality, not everything has a thinking mind. So without the thinking mind, still an attitude. But add the thinking mind. Go ahead, add it. And it's not hard to see that attitude is inevitable. Because the mind is going to interpret, the mind is going to give it a meaning, the mind is going to say that's important, that's not, that's good, that's bad. And personality is going to say I like that, I don't like that, I believe in that, I don't believe in that, I'm attracted to that, I'm repelled by that. So the idea of no attitude is an impossibility. Even the idea of the best, quote unquote, spiritual attitude, very open, very accepting, very non-judgmental, very unconditionally available. That's the attitude of unconditional availability. That's the attitude of total openness. If it's coming through a human form, it has an attitude element. Cannot be eradicated. It will be eradicated at some point in your journey when you're far away from being a human being, when you don't even remember or know what a human being is. Then maybe you've got a shot at no attitude. But we're only dealing with your time here in this discussion. And your time here is in a human body with a personality, with a thinking mind. So you're stuck with some kind of attitude. The trouble, of course, is very obvious that most people live in such a way that their attitudes are taken to be automatic, are taken to be inevitable, are not taken to be a choice, not taken to be I'm responsible for my attitude and I can change my attitude. The general attitude is attitudes are not in your control. The same way, not too different from my preferences are not in my control, which I've talked about for years, how that's not true. You can change your preference as easy as you change your underwear, if you are serious about it. So, attitude is part and parcel of this life. And the idea that attitudes just are what they are and you're kind of along for the ride is a very, very childish idea, very self-defeating idea. Because just like you can decide that you don't like the emotional weather today inside you and you can actually consciously change it, you can do the same with attitude. Now that's the lower rung, lower levels, lower rungs of the attitude. Let's call it attitude scale. There's no such thing, but let's call it that. So the everyday attitudes, which involve preferences, which involve reactions, which involve how you interpret what you experience, those are not at all difficult to reform or change. They're very, very malleable, much more than people think. You can simply, and that's the common term, adopt a different attitude. I don't like that guy. You can adopt the attitude, well, I can find something to like in him. Everybody has something to like if you look hard enough. You can adopt a different attitude. You can be non-rejecting. You can try to like somebody you don't like or find something to like in somebody you don't like. So that's just an easy example of how easy it is. Now when you get to non-lower rung attitudes, more pervasive attitudes, more characteristic attitudes, that's a little harder, a little less malleable, a little more difficult to simply go ahead and change it, but that can be done too. And then finally there's the mega attitudes, the highest, most pervasive ones on the scale, the ones that you kind of carry consistently. I stay away from people who smoke. I prefer healthy living. I don't care for worldly people. I only hang out with spiritual people. My life is about finding God, so my attitude is the material world doesn't concern me very much. The more pervasive, more you carry them with you for a long time, attitudes. And of course, hearing me say that, I'm sure it easily comes into your mind, or if it doesn't when I say it, you'll see easily that over time, those of course tend to change. You don't have the same attitudes when you're 16 as when you're 36, as when you're 66. But they shift over broader periods of time, and you tend to have a mind explanation. Oh, my attitude changed because I had more experience with this, and so my attitude changed. You have an explanation for why that happens. Whereas the middle and the lower rungs, you don't really think about that much. You don't feel the need for an explanation when it changes. Oh, well, I didn't like broccoli for a long time, but then one day I smelled it on someone else's plate, and it smelled kind of good to me, so I tried it, and I realized my attitude has changed. I like broccoli now. You don't really spend a lot of time trying to figure out why that happened. You just kind of accept that it changed, right? So life without attitude means you recognize that you actually have tremendous ability, tremendous flexibility, and can actually form your attitudes consciously, purposely, intentionally. You can actually choose. You can actually take a fresh look at the menu and say, aha, I like this one better than the one I've got. I know I ordered the grilled cheese, but I think I'm going to have the tuna. It's not too late to change my order. This doesn't sound revolutionary. This doesn't sound like a big deal, but it actually goes against everything you've ever been told about personality, attitude. The general conventional approach, the idea behind the general approach is these things aren't really up to you. They just get formed by life, by your experience in life. And if you said these things in a conventional milieu, in conventional circles, people would not be real interested. They wouldn't listen. Because they accept the notion that attitudes are what they are, and really it isn't something you have to pay a lot of attention to unless you notice you have an attitude or people tell you you have an attitude that is destructive or not good or unpleasant to others, and then maybe you have some motivation to change it. But except for that, it's kind of a given. So I'm correcting that notion and telling you that it's not a given in any way, shape, or form. In fact, your position as a spiritual seeker, of course, involves a number of attitudes and is itself a mega attitude. And you chose it. Either you chose it because you like the idea or you chose it because you recognized it was already the case. And that's a perfect example of how you can choose your attitude. And that you're not stuck with whatever is listed on today's menu or this year's menu or this decade's menu. So obviously the best approach, if you have to have some kind of attitude, if it's a built-in structure that doesn't go away as long as you're in a human life, as long as you're on this planet, attitude is going to be part of your experience. Obviously the best approach is have the best attitude you can. Well, then the question is, what does that mean? What does it mean, best attitude? On the surface, it looks like it means, well, let's back up. On the conventional surface, it looks like it means positive thinking. Have a good thought. don't be negative. And of course, that's whitewashing. That's not recognizing all the dimensions of life, and it's ridiculous. You get a little spiritualized, you get beyond the crap philosophy of positive thinking, and you have the possibility of really adopting an attitude and set of attitudes that help you, that aren't about a philosophical approach. So it seems like once you get beyond the conventional view, it seems like the best idea would be to have a more spiritual attitude. What we said a few minutes ago, more open, more accepting, more unconditionally loving, more non-judgmental, more available to what is. That sounds like the right answer, right? Nobody's going to probably argue with that. I'm not even going to argue with it. But I'm going to say that that's the cheap version. You can do that, but that's not as helpful as the real possibility. Of course, if you're running around with all kinds of problem attitudes, of course, change them to that list and you're better off. Nobody's going to say that's not a good idea. But I'm not in the good idea business. I'm in the best idea business. So you can do way better than that. You can actually skip having an artificially open attitude, having an artificially non-judgmental attitude, and you can have a more high-minded, let's say, concept of attitude. You can have a more spiritually rich understanding of attitude, how it works and what's possible. What it means, how it works, and what's possible. You cannot get stuck. You don't have to get stuck in the adoption of an attitude, in taking it on and trying to make it yours. You actually can skip that and go right to the much better approach, which is simply attitude from the spiritual perspective. Attitude that is based on changing how you live, attitude, how you create the environment that has the name attitude, because attitude's an environment. Everything's an environment. Let me say it again. Attitude is an environment you create in yourself for yourself. So the spiritually imbued view of attitude, way to handle the inevitable presence of attitude, is to simply come up with a format of how to develop best attitude, or what the Buddhists call right attitude. The Christians do it by saying, what would Jesus do? The serious Christians do it. Well, actually the non-serious ones quote that too, a lot. So that's the monkey see, monkey do approach. I'm going to do what that guy did, or what it seems to me that guy would do. I'm going to take the attitude that it seems to me that person would take, even if they're God, even if they're a higher being, whatever the belief associated with it. I'm going to copy them. That doesn't work. It actually is monkey see, monkey do. Because it will never be your real attitude. Even if you practice it for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, and you think you're really good at it. And I've met Christians who think they're really good at it. It's exactly the same as the Hindu meditators who meditate in a cave in the Himalayas for 10 years and feel they've reached a high state and eradicated all human foibles. And they come down from the cave and they go back to their monastery and they tell the other folks, hey, it all worked out good, I'm back, I'm enlightened. And then they find out that they just missed dinner and they have a fit. So nothing happened in that cave, because in that rarefied atmosphere, it's easy to believe you've reached something better. And you can create that rarefied atmosphere in yourself by saying, I practice what I think Christ would do. But sooner or later, you'll miss dinner, or somebody will step on your toe, or somebody will break your most prized possession, and you'll start screaming. Your real self will come out, because it was just a cover-up. Doing what Christ would do is a cover-up. You can't do what Christ would do, because Christ is Christ, and John is John, and Mary is Mary, and you're you. And Bill is Bill, and Sam is Sam, and Penelope is Penelope. So the monkey see, monkey do. I'm going to copy somebody high. I'm going to copy somebody godlike. I'm going to copy somebody who's clearly spiritually advanced, and that will be the right. I'll use the example approach. I'll follow an example. It's monkey see, monkey do. It doesn't work. It's not meant for human consumption. You weren't put together as a monkey see, monkey do project. You are required, spiritually it's so. You are required to be who you are, and in fact have no power to be anything other than who and what you are. So copying someone else, which is all that is trying to skip over the fact that there's a you here. That's why it doesn't work. Got it? It's important because you get taught this left and right. Just follow the example of so-and-so. Well, that works for some little things that aren't significant, but it doesn't work for what matters, because you can't be a carbon copy of somebody else, no matter how godly they are, because it'll be you as a facsimile, not the real you. The real you sooner or later will come bursting out. It's inevitable. Because all you've done is put on a mask. You haven't really done anything from the inside out. You've adopted a behavior set, or what you believe is a better way, and negated yourself, and that simply never leads to anything that involves true transformation or true advancement or true spiritual awareness. It's just fooling yourself. So setting up a new format for cultivating attitudes in yourself is not going to be a process of finding exemplars and then trying to do what they do, or have the attitude that they appear to have, right? Just copying of one kind of or another. In school, if you copy off someone else's paper, you could get in trouble. But in life, you can copy anybody and nothing bad will happen, except spiritually, you'll be going exactly in the wrong direction. But nobody will hit your knuckles with a ruler or send you to the principal's office. You're free to copy, but it doesn't work. So developing a format for yourself for right attitude, the first thing is it has to be original. It has to be from you. It has to be your wisdom. Now, you can look to Jesus, Buddha, whoever, as an example of wisdom. But that's about as far as you can go with that. It simply tells you wisdom is possible. It tells you here's some understandings that that person was able to share with the world. But the source has to be you. It can be enriched by someone else. But it can't be based on someone else's vision. It can't be based on someone else's teaching. You and only you can be the actual authority when it comes to cultivating your own attitudes. It cannot be a borrowed approach, even if it's not copying, but somehow borrowed. It has to be original. This is where the discourse on creativity comes into play, because that's a creative process. And it's also where the discourse on the natural born rebel comes into play, because it has to be original. You have to be capable of original thinking, of having an original thought of your own, not simply a regurgitated thing that you heard a long time ago, or a form of it. Has to be actually from your innerness, your essence. So that's the first thing. It's got to be yours. The second thing is it has to be identified. You have to come up with it. You have to not so much choose it as get clear on it. So we're talking about a mega process where you cultivate a kind of a pool of attitudes that serve any given situation, because you can't take an attitude that you've cultivated and plug it in to the situation at 2 o'clock on Tuesday, because that's simply artificial. What you're wanting to do ideally is distill the best in yourself attitudinally, so that that can more easily come into play spontaneously in any given moment. And any given moment means that one attitude may suit for that moment, but a different one is needed for this moment. So it can't be a menu, it can't be a list, it can't be a preset, now I push this button. So it means a pool of attitudes that you actually have formed for yourself, formatted for yourself, that represent the closest you realistically can get to what you would consider ideal. You simply think it through, you ponder it, you meditate on it, you get clear on it, and you identify what that would look like. I'm not giving you an assignment, I'm just wanting you to understand attitude better. If you want to take it on as a project, great. But I'm not spelling it out this way with the intention of now everybody's supposed to go out and do this. That's not what I mean. I'm just, if you're interested, I'm giving you the method. So you become aware of the handful of mega attitudes that really matter to you, that represent for you the ideal. If you could just make yourself as perfect as you want. And this does not, in practice, come out to be as easy as it sounds. That type of clarity and that kind of knowing your own originality, you're not typically asked to do that. So that process would typically take a long time, months or years, not days or weeks. So you kind of marinate, you adopt an awareness about attitude. You keep pondering it, you keep going over it, you keep watching, you keep gathering data from inside and outside so that you make yourself an expert on your own attitudes. And then you distill what you think is best, what feels right to you. And that will amount to at most 5 or less, typically 3 or 4 basic attitudes. And you simply marinate in those. You continue to dwell on them. You consider them for a long time and you kind of trot them out whenever it seems right. You try them on for size and you start using them in life. And you gradually go through this process of the other attitudes that you didn't choose or cultivate or become aware of, but just came with along the way that you're not so thrilled about. You go through this process of those kind of automatically get weaker the more you are cultivating the ones that you've distilled in yourself, the ones that you know represent your highest ideal, represent your preferred approach. And over time, as the influenced attitudes, the conditioned attitudes, that's mostly what they are, start to evaporate and the ones you've chosen start to be more familiar to you and start happening more often, coming into play more often, either purposely, consciously, intentionally, or you just remember in the moment. They fit and they come in. And then you practice, it's 3 stages. Third stage is you practice that for a long time. And at the end of that, you'll be living those attitudes all the time. You will not be subject to shifts in attitude the way you were. You will not be living the conventional life of attitude anymore because you've, like a fine wine, you've aged yourself. You've let all the sediment go to the bottom and you have activated your own original attitude set. You've practiced it and it's become natural and normal for you. And then it becomes difficult to fall into what Buddhists would call wrong attitude. Then you've trained yourself. You've taken the bucking bronco set of attitudes and tamed them. You've broken them. How they say breaking a horse, is that it? Breaking a horse. You've broken them and made them compliant. You've replaced them with better attitudes that comply with your wishes and your better wisdom. And the bucking bronchos are a thing of the past. Now, that doesn't mean you've conquered all human foibles. That doesn't mean you've eradicated all flaws in you. That doesn't mean you've become a perfect human being. It just means that you have done the bodybuilding that makes you really strong on the level that's attitude. The same way you can go to the gym and be really strong on the level of muscles, body muscles. Arnold Schwarzenegger. You can be really strong. By the way, he doesn't look like that anymore. You can do the same with attitude. And here's the bad news. You're kind of required to do this if you're a serious spiritual seeker. If you don't do it, the spiritual process will do it anyway, and it won't be as good, and you'll flounder more. And the way I'm describing it tonight, it's kind of a 2-year project, if you want an estimate, because I said this is not weeks or a few months. The 3 stages I described, roughly 2 years for most people. Now, when you think about how short 2 years is, that's not really a lot for a permanent mastery. That's what it really is, a mastery of the attitude level of life. That's not an unreasonable investment. In fact, it seems short to me. 2 years and you have made yourself attitudinally into who you ideally want to be. Now, there's no guarantee in that you'll do well. There's no guarantee in that you'll do the right thing. There's no guarantee in that you'll do what's good. But it's way more likely. Because in that distillation process, and second that distillation process, and first that getting more clear process, that's what you've done. You've identified what you feel more for real in your heart and soul is right and good. Well, let's use 3 words, right and good and true. And if your typical attitudinal response, if your typical attitude that arises is based on what is right and good and true to the best of your knowledge, the best of your ability to discern, you tell me how that can ever be a bad thing. Well, you could. If you're Hitler, he believed what he was doing was right and good and true. So that's the only exception. If you're a lunatic, if you're a madman, if you're a murderer, if you are black-hearted, that's the exception. But the people I'm talking to are none of those things, so you have nothing to worry about. It can only be good. So that's all nothing less and nothing more than activating your spirituality on the level of attitude. Remember, attitude's an environment and attitude is a level. All environments are levels. Let me throw that in. All environments are levels. So you've spiritualized yourself on the attitude level. And this is where people get really screwed up. They spiritualize on the relational level, they spiritualize on the behavioral level, they spiritualize on the thinking level, but they don't spiritualize on the attitude level. And that's why they're all sweet and nice, and there's a real peacefulness. And then if somebody else eats the last piece of cake, they tear their head off, verbally, because they didn't bring it to the attitudinal level. They didn't spiritualize, they didn't transform the level that no matter what else is going on, that level is always involved. They didn't change the one or improve the one level that can't ever be pulled out, can't ever be sectioned off, can't ever be left out of the equation. Think about it. Everything else you can do something about and leave it out if you choose to. You don't want to behave a certain way, or you don't want to behave badly. You sit on your damn hands. You don't do a thing. You don't do any behavior. You can do that. On the thinking level, you can simply choose to think different or control your mind in some way, or even go blah, 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 stop thinking. Just prevent yourself because you don't want to go there. And you can go down the list of all the different aspects of a living person, an interacting person. And the only one that you'll never shut down, the only one that will always pervade, the only one that will never be in your control in the sense of just keeping it out for a second, an hour, a day. The only one you can't do that with is attitude. Because that's how it's structured. That's how you're structured. Attitude is non-erasable, non-removable. That level cannot be pulled out or shut down for an hour. It can't be shut down for repair. You have to repair it while it's operating. So this is the level that gets a lot of attention if you go to listen to motivational speakers. And then the rest of the time in life gets almost no attention. And when it does get attention, it's from the false notion that not much you can do about it. Oh, forgive yourself. It's not much you can do about it. Or everybody with your background has that attitude, so don't worry about it. It's not a sin. Again and again, the message is that you can't do much about attitude except in a motivational sense. You can pump yourself up, get enthusiastic, and try to transform it and make a new attitude, which is exactly works every time, just like New Year's resolutions works for most people. Works great for about 2-3 weeks. And then you revert to what's normal for you. So if you really want the highest attitude adjustment in life, you have to get clear about what's already natural for you, so that that reverting doesn't happen, because you're operating from what's already the case in you. You are not adopting something from the external. You're identifying what's already essential in you, what's already representative of you for real. And then the other aspect of this that I haven't said yet that's important, I've alluded to it because, like I said, it'll be 5 or less, typically 3 or 4, even 2 or 3 would not be unusual. It's the Zen of attitude. It really becomes that only 3 or 4 attitudes are going on ever. Whether it's a little thing or a big thing. The inner influence, which is another way to look at attitude, the inner influence is consistent. You're not all over the map. You don't have 26 attitudes like you had before you go through this kind of process, where you're one way in relationships, and you're another way toward how you feel about work, and you're another way when you're on vacation, and you're a complete chaos. You're like 82 different people at the same time, depending on the circumstances. This kind of attitudinal self-creation does a really beautiful job of harmonizing you, because now it's only 3 or 4 operating principles that are coming into play into everything. You start to unify from that. Instead of what people often do in spiritual life, and there are many practices to do it, which is to focus on unifying yourself, which doesn't tend to work very well. This is the indirect approach. Your attitudinal position, when it gets handled the way I'm talking about, and this isn't the only way, by the way. You can do the same thing through other methods, but I'm giving you kind of the general method. It has the amazing effect, once it's in place, of immediately beginning to unify who and what you are. You become less a set of disparate behaviors and different reactions, and much more a consistent responding. And life gets much simpler, and life gets much easier. One of the reasons life is difficult for you, if it is, and for most of us it is there are too many attitudes. Nothing like this is going on. The process I'm talking about, nothing like this has been put in front of you to try. Nothing like this has ever been suggested to you. Despite all the wonderful things that have been suggested to you, that probably wasn't one of them. That you take control of your own attitudes for real and how to do it. Because you're told in motivational speaking to take control of your attitudes, but you're not really told how to do it. You are, but it's bogus. You're told a monkey see, monkey do kind of approach. Go ahead and see how that works. Because that'll work for the length of the motivational seminar, and a couple of weeks beyond. You'll be enthusiastic, and then it'll be like you never even heard it. I'm talking about what actually takes effort and what actually works, and what will benefit you permanently. But it has to begin with a re-evaluation of your understanding of the word attitude. That attitude isn't just what you notice your attitude is. That's the common approach. My attitude just is what it is. I'm not in control of it. It just is what it is. Well, you can settle for that like most people do, but the better way is possible, where your attitude isn't just whatever it happens to become due to whatever reason it got that way, where you get to choose. And somewhere along the line, if you genuinely and really advance spiritually, and most of you are advancing spiritually, genuinely and really, you may get surprised, because somewhere along the line, if it gets triggered, and it usually does, this will become absolutely unavoidable. It'll likely happen some other way, which will be more difficult, more traumatic, more unintentional. Life, you could say, or the universe will kind of force you to cultivate better attitudes. But I'm saying you can do it without being forced. You can do it for your own good. You can do it without life hitting you over the head, so that you realize, aha, this might be a good idea. So if you end up with your own original attitudes, the small number that will actually be there, it's not like you're going around and then a situation arises and you say, aha, number 3 now. it spontaneously just comes in. Just like now, spontaneously your attitude gets engaged, whatever it happens to be, towards whatever it is. But it's not operating in your best interest, because a lot of it's borrowed, a lot of it's from outside influence, a lot of it's cultural, and most of it's conditioned in one way or another, whether familial, whether societal, or even peer group. Because when you change groups, you generally have a shift in attitude. So I'm simply wanting to point out to you that you can actually be the master of your attitudes. And when you have done the distillation process and it's real, whatever response to whatever situation your own real attitude results in, it may be right, it may be wrong, but you will not feel guilty. You will not feel regretful. If it doesn't work out, you won't blame yourself. You won't feel like, oh, I made a mistake. I had a bad attitude. I had the wrong attitude. You won't have that thought, because you'll be really being you. And when you're really being you, and it's really real, and it's coming from the source that's you, not some outside influence that isn't you, it's almost impossible to be regretful. It's almost impossible to feel guilty, even when you see clearly, aha, that was bad, or that was wrong, or I should have done different. But it will be, I should have done different as a seeing, not as a beating yourself up. Because you did the literal best you could. You were your real self doing what's truly right for you and what you feel is truly right for the situation. You weren't withholding anything. You weren't trying to manipulate anything. You weren't trying to control anything. You were giving your real response, your genuine response, your sincere, spontaneous response, your true, fully relating response, because your real attitude was in play. See how that would work that way? It really is the life without regret, because you are not operating with this whole big bag of possibilities. It's gotten narrowed down to what's really you. It's amazing that when that happens, it's really only three, or what, in terms of the level called attitude, it's really only three or four. Considering that up until then you live with almost countless and even competing attitudes. It's kind of astounding to think that what's natural for a human being for real is only a few. And it's absolutely true. Only a few attitudes is the natural approach, is the way it's meant to be. So this is meaningful because it is the spiritual in daily life. That's one aspect. And the other aspect is in spirituality directly. If you don't have distilled attitudes and you haven't risen to that level of how you conduct yourself, you are much more buffetable about. You can be waylaid, you can be blown off course. But if you're attitudinally solid, if you have that muscle, your actual spiritual movement will be more successful. Your spiritual intention will be more able to happen, and your worldly level aspect of it will be way less problematic than it is now. So it takes care of both the higher and the lower. It takes care of the material side and the spiritual side. The impact can't be overstated. It's a spiritual requirement that you're not required to do. But at some point it will happen. And my point is, why not be ahead of the game and you do it first? Before it happens as a requirement of some other situation or some other spiritual position, position, why not accomplish it on your own first and be literally in a head start position? I would never give it to anyone as an assignment because it's something you have to want to do. But I am certainly offering it as a possibility for anyone and encouraging you, if you're interested, give it a try. Play with it, experiment with it, see how what you've been taught and told about the subject of attitude is mostly nonsense, fatalistic. You can't really do much about it. Or it's just a product of what life teaches you, as if you're a victim of it, as if, the weather is rainy, you had to go outside, so of course you're going to get all wet. Have you heard of an umbrella? That's what this is in a sense, a spiritual umbrella. If you purify your attitude, ultimately it's a purification. If you purify your attitudes, you are giving yourself significant protection. So let me wrap it up with that notion, because I've been giving you the mechanics, I've been giving you the practical, I've been giving you the map of it, how it works in everyday life and how it works in spiritual life. But the most telling thing I can say about it is that everything I've talked about tonight is a process of purification. And purification on the attitude level is powerful, is always transformational, is always far-reaching in its effects. So remember that spiritual life is a continuous purification of more and more in you. And that the purification of attitude is a huge chunk handled. So I'm not suggesting you do it. I'm just pointing out the value, and you decide if you want to do it. I don't consider it the most necessary thing you can do. There are things that are quite necessary. I'm not talking about necessary. This is optional. Because if you don't do it, you haven't lost anything. And if life makes you do it, your spiritual life makes you do it, God makes you do it, the universe makes you do it, at some point, you'll see. You'll see that what I've been talking about actually has this form, that it comes down to just a few, that it can be distilled, that you can consciously cultivate it, that you can become aware and clear about what are your right and true natural attitudes, original to you. You can shape them. You can have a say in what they are and look like and represent. It isn't accidental. But if all of that seems too daunting and you don't want to take it on at this point in life, Don't add it to your grab bag of things I'm neglecting to do and ways I'm failing spiritually. Don't take it that way. But do understand that the spiritual process is more and more purification, and then purify that. And that everything you have ever done as a spiritual seeker was a form of purification. And everything good that ever happened and every way you've ever advanced represents or represented a type of purification or a level of purification. So you can't be attitude free. Life without attitude doesn't exist. But the spiritual ideal is life lived with much more pure attitudes. Much more pure in the fact that they're really yours, and much more pure in the sense that they are available to you and represent your best wisdom, your deepest heart. So give some thought, if nothing else, give some thought to the significance of attitudes, because you're going to have them for a long time. They don't, the level attitude doesn't die when you die. When the body dies, attitude doesn't die. Doesn't mean you find yourself after death with the attitudes you had in life, but it does mean you'll see there's an attitude. And at some point, not tonight, I want to talk to you about the attitude of the disciple in relation to the guru, because this is an area that people need instruction in and can be confused about and don't always get educated in and shouldn't flounder needlessly, and because it'll help me a hell of a lot. Because, and this is what I'll end with, your attitudes, those of you who are initiated disciples, your attitudes, the attitudes you carry in you, whether you're aware of them, not aware of them, the attitudes that are really operating, profoundly affect the guru. And better attitudes is really good for me. So this isn't the last time we will talk about attitudes, but this is the general introduction. Ask yourself randomly at any given moment as an exercise, what's my attitude right now? It will show you a lot.